good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. We will be starting the webinar in a couple of minutes. So welcome. Please, everyone, keep your videos off and your microphones muted. Thank you so much. We'll start in a minute. Well, everyone, it's a pleasure to be opening this webinar for the global presentation of the Youth Peace and Security Programming Handbook. Very happy to see that we have many participants and friends connected from all around the world. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Cécile Mazzacurati. I work with UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, and I am in charge of the Joint Secretariat on Youth Peace and Security on behalf of UNFPA and the Peace Building Support Office. So we have a very interesting program this morning to discuss with all of you the Programming Handbook on Youth Peace and Security. And I will pass the floor to our speakers in a minute. I'm just going to remind everyone some ground rules before we start. Since many of us are connected, I'm asking everyone to please keep muted and to please keep off camera unless you're one of the speakers. That will allow better connection. So please only have your camera on if you are one of the speakers when it's the moment you're joining for the presentation. Thank you so much. And we will start this webinar today with opening remarks from my Deputy Executive Director, Diene Keita. Diene, you have the floor.
Hello, Cécile. Good morning. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good day to you all. It is my great pleasure to be welcoming you all to the global launch of the Youth, Peace and Security Program Handbook. The handbook is a joint production of the United Nations Population Fund, the United Nations Development Program, and the Peace Building Support Office of the Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs. I would like to express our appreciation for the generous support and technical expertise we received from the Folke Bernadotte Academy. It has benefited from the insight and guidance from numerous colleagues from the UN system working at country, regional, and global level. I extend my thanks to all of them for their important contribution. The Youth, Peace and Security Programming Handbook incarnates our joint commitment to the implementation of the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda, an essential dimension of United Nations work for and with youth, and a core dimension of our work to build peace at all levels. From UNFPA, we are committed to contribute to sustain and build peace for all. A peace that goes beyond stopping the guns and ensures young women and men rise to safety, security, and opportunity. From the home to school, from the community to the nation at large. The handbook aims to ensure the operational readiness and capacity of practitioners to implement the youth, peace, and security agenda. It builds on existing guidance and lessons learned from the United Nations and partners organizations. It draws on the findings and recommendations from the Missing Peace, Independent Progress Study on Youth, Peace, and Security. The handbook is intended to be used by country, regional, and global teams in the United Nations system, but it can also support field practitioners beyond the United Nations. Very importantly, it provides concrete direction to meaningfully engage young women and men in all stages of the programming processes. As such, I believe this handbook will be of use beyond the peace building field and can accelerate the implementation of Youth 2030, the United Nations Youth Strategy. Today is kicking off a number of presentations, webinars, and training sessions that will be organized on this handbook in the coming times. I hope you all make great use of the handbook, and I wish you all a very, very best discussion today. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. And now I invite Sarah Lister, Head of Governance at UNDP, to also give some opening remarks. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I have a few tech issues here. I'm just, there we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Cecile. Thank you, Diane. As you said, I'm the Head of Governance at the United Nations Development Programme, and I'm delighted to join Diane in warmly welcoming you all here. And I see there are more than 200 people online, and that is really fantastic. Allow me first to acknowledge present here today, the young peace builders whose daily work, courage and determination deserves all our attention. Let me join also Diane in thanking Sweden, who has generously supported this effort through the Folke Bernadotte Academy, and that's a partnership which we highly value. And let me also thank those from across the broader UN system, in particular UN entities who substantively contributed to this interagency effort, which was co-led by UNDP, UNFPA, and PBSO. It really was a collaborative effort, and we couldn't have done it without the whole UN system coming together. So next on the agenda, which I know you are all waiting for, you will hear a detailed presentation of the handbook by Tammy and Noelia. But let me please highlight 3 reasons first why this handbook is such a valuable and timely resource. Firstly, as we all know, it's released in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disproportionately affected young people. Key challenges they face include the inequalities and youth unemployment, lack of adequate youth responsive policies, human rights violations and shrinking civic space, lack of access to education, and mental health issues. Secondly, as we reflect on the many challenges we face and on the future of governance and development in our societies, the UN needs to listen to youth and partner with them more and better. We need to invest in dedicated youth capacities, expand avenues for youth meaningful participation, value young women and men as experts and fund their initiatives, and support youth-inclusive and youth-led accountability mechanisms. And thirdly, recognizing and championing young people's role in decision-making, formal or informal, is fundamental if we are to advance peaceful, just, and inclusive societies to sustain peace. And this handbook offers very practical recommendations in this regard: how to support an active role by youth in conflict analysis and assessments, how to foster a conducive environment for young people to meaningfully influence priority setting, implementation, and monitoring, and how to enhance young people's political participation at all levels, as well as how to strengthen youth leadership by supporting youth-led coalitions. And there is more, much more in the handbook. I do hope you will read, use, and share this comprehensive, clear, and action-oriented handbook, which is easily accessible on the Youth for Peace platform. And I'm sure somebody will put the link in the chat for you. I would just note, I have read it all, and I commend it to you. Thank you, and please do reach out to the team if you have any feedback, comments, or questions. Thank you very much. It was truly a pleasure to have this opportunity to join you this morning. Back to you, Cecile.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you to you and Diane for these opening remarks. And again, welcome everyone. Very happy to see many of you are connected from all around the world. So this is how this is going to go. We're going to have a presentation of the handbook by its main author and one of the main contributors. So that will be an opportunity to go into really the substance of the handbook. And this will be followed by by a panel with colleagues from the field who will be speaking about the realities, opportunities, challenges of field programming on youth peace and security. And after this, we'll have a moment for Q&A, so all of you can ask questions. Please make good use of the chat box. I see it's already active. Introduce yourself, tell us who you are. And if you have questions, the chat box is where you can pose it. So please, please use it, and we'll address questions in the last segment of the webinar. For now, we're going to go into a presentation of the handbook itself. I'm going to invite Tammy Smith, who's the Senior Advisor at the Peace Building Support Office for the Peace Building Fund and the main author of the handbook, to please turn her camera on and to start the presentation of the handbook. Tammy, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Cecile. And Ylva, if I can ask you to put the presentation up on the screen. Super. Great. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of background and then sort of launch into a more descriptive detail about the actual handbook. And basically what I wanted to say was the adoption of Resolution 2250 in 2015 really was a key turning point for the youth, peace, and security agenda, as the resolution provided us with a powerful expression of recognition on the part of member states that young people must be a part of the sustaining peace agenda, not only because it will lead to better outcomes, but because they have a fundamental right to participate. It wasn't long, however, before we began seeing an emerging gap, though, between a commitment to partner better with young people on the one hand, and good practices for how to practically do that on the other. At the Peace Building Fund, for example, we launched the first edition of our special call for proposals called the Youth Promotion Initiative in 2016. To better dedicate funding, we were able to only approve 3 projects because we couldn't identify more high quality proposals that met a minimum standard of approval. Many projects never consulted young people about the goals of the proposals, while others treated young women and young men as tokens, or even worse, were rooted in false stereotypes that saw all young men as aggressors and all young women as victims. So from the very beginning, the message was clear. We needed better approaches for how to support young people's initiatives, their involvement, and their leadership across the range of country contexts where we work. So this handbook then is, in a way, a response to these kinds of recurrent challenges that we've seen in the 5 years since the passage of Resolution 2250. I won't be going into a very detailed accounting of each of the chapters here, but I would like to provide a bit of an orientation to help guide practitioners to effectively use the various chapters at different stages over the life course of design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of peace-building programming, so that we can truly honor the fundamental premise that sustainable and equitable peace needs to include the voices, the goals, the concerns, and the actions of young women and men. So I'll be addressing chapters 1 through 6 of the handbook, which offer step-by-step guides for the youth-led, youth-inclusive peace building, before then handing the presentation over to my UNDP colleague, Noelia, who will outline some effective programmatic entry points through which to apply the steps in chapters 1 through 6. Ylva, the next slide, please. So the handbook starts with a brief introduction that lays out the global policy framework and then walks us through some key turning points in the YPS agenda. The handbook then presents a series of fundamental principles of engagement in chapter 1. Principles that we believe should infuse all aspects of the subject. The remaining chapters then focus on discrete stages in programming through which youth-sensitive and youth-inclusiveness lenses, including how and why to conduct a conflict analysis, identifying thematic priorities and theories of change, defining appropriate outcomes, and launching effective monitoring and evaluation strategies. Each of these chapters begin with a brief orientation on the topic that touches upon what it is, basically, and why it's important, before offering step-by-step practical guidance. So as I just mentioned, I'd like to unpack a bit more of chapter 1, which lays out some fundamental building blocks for meaningful youth participation. The handbook underscores that a first step to launching any engagement is understanding the various roles young women and men may have within an initiative. Here, the handbook offers clear guidance on what it means to engage young people through the lens of these different roles. Ilva, next slide. Ilva? Thank you. The first role that we see is the role as beneficiaries or target groups. In other words, that they are the subject of the change that is being sought. Though they may not be partners in the implementation of the actual work, and they may not have been instrumental in selecting the goals or the means of achieving the goal. We can see a clear pitfall in seeing young people through this lens is that frequently the goals are chosen for them based on assumptions about what young people want or need. Chapters 2 through 6 then offer some practical guidance for how to avoid these kinds of pitfalls when designing projects that see young people through the lens of a beneficiary or a stakeholder. Young people may also be engaged as partners in the initiative, as actors who implement and carry out the work of a project. The handbook chapters offer suggestions for how to meaningfully engage young people in this manner without turning them into instruments of our own agendas. Finally, the third lens through which to view young people's roles is as full-on leaders, as agents of change who articulate their own meaningful goals and work toward youth-inclusive means of achieving them. Now, there is a place for each of these three kinds of roles within peace-building programming, and I've taken a little bit of time here to detail them because seeing the role of young people through each of these lenses has subsequent implications for how best to engage and support them. Next slide, please. Ilva, can you? Thank you. Other key principles in this first chapter relate to inclusivity, ensuring that the way in which we reach out to young people enables us to see the range of identities, of goals, and of capacities that different constituencies bring to the table. And we shouldn't be surprised that young people are not a monolithic block, or that they harbor maybe some of the same stereotypes or even chauvinisms that we see among other parts of the population. In examining our own efforts at outreach and inclusivity, the handbook forces us to confront sometimes difficult truths about our business as usual practices. Are we amplifying inequalities by routinely working already with already engaged young people who share our views and may speak our language? Have we unintentionally made it difficult for young women, people with disabilities, or LGBTQI youth to participate in planned events because of the time of day or the physical location of a meeting? Chapters 2 through 6 offer some suggestions and keep asking many of these kinds of questions that push us to reconsider how we can better partner with young people. Chapter 1 also drives home the message that young people already have a wealth of knowledge and skills, and our engagement should be looking for ways to best respect and support that knowledge and those skills and to nurture them. And finally, as with all of our work, above all else, do no harm. This universal principle, though, takes on new meaning when engaging with youth, who may have additional layers of risk associated with their engagement based on age-based notions of power and legitimacy that can sometimes couple unhelpfully with gender-based discrimination to heighten risk for some categories of young people. So with that brief introduction, let me turn now to the basic structure of the handbook that works along the following chapters. Next slide, please. So moving beyond chapter 1 that we've just sort of had a brief overview of, chapter 2 starts from the very first step of good peace-building programming, conflict analysis. And here we see how including the voices and perspectives of diverse groups of young people helps us understand the unique experience of young people with respect to conflict factors and actors, as well as opportunities for peace. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. Building off of the conflict analysis, Chapter 3 of the handbook offers then suggestions for how to include young people's views in participation while identifying the priorities of an intervention and unpacking basic assumptions about how change is expected to work. And this is an especially critical step, I believe, and one where we very often overlook the particular experience of young women and men, experience that could help debunk incorrect assumptions and place us on firmer conceptual footing. Next slide. Chapter 4, we see, then guides the reader in how to transform the priorities and theories of change identified in Chapter 3 into actionable, measurable change in partnership with young people, while Chapters 5 and 6 then indicate a range of innovative ways of engaging young people in data collection and analysis for robust monitoring and effective evaluation. These 6 chapters form the basic outline of the handbook's guidance. And at this point, I'll turn the mic over to my colleague, Emmanuel, who will walk us through Chapter 7, which identifies a number of common programmatic entry points through which to apply the more basic guidance we've just seen in Chapters 1 through 6. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. And thank you, Tammy and Cecile. Tammy, just once again to say how grateful we all are, I think, in the Interagency Task Force for the incredible work that you've done on this handbook. So I'm Noelia from UNDP. I had the pleasure of co-leading this task force with Cecile and other colleagues. I'm very pleased to give you a flavor of what the 20-page Chapter 7 is. It contains a wealth of entry points on policy and program. It's articulated around the 5 pillars of the Youth, Peace and Security resolution, with more than 70 concrete recommendations and about 120 examples from a wide range of entities within the UN system and beyond. In the UN system, from political missions to funds and programs, to specialized agencies, joint programs supported by the UN Peace Building Fund at all levels. So the diversity of Youth, Peace and Security program certainly reflects the diversity of the youth peace work as well. Ilva, we can move to the next slide, please. And next one, I will briefly highlight what the 5 pillars cover and then zoom in one or perhaps 2 of them, but I think rather one. The chapter starts with a focus on participation, which is really about promoting and supporting youth meaningful participation in all phases of informal and formal peace and security and political transition processes, from negotiation to implementation, including in a national and local level dialogues, in constitution making, transitional justice, conflict resolution, and other political and governance processes. The second pillar is about protection. So it's about facilitating an inclusive, safe, and enabling and gender responsive environment in which actors, including youth from all walks of life and all backgrounds, are recognized, provided with adequate support, adequate protection to be able to implement violence prevention activities, to support social cohesion, to carry out also their work independently and without undue interference. Pillar 3 is about prevention. Here the objective is to promote and support inclusive and enabling environments in which young people, including youth from all backgrounds and the most marginalized youth, are recognized and provided with adequate support to implement conflict and violence prevention activities and to support reconciliation and social cohesion. Pillar 4, about partnerships. This is about establishing and strengthening partnerships with and on youth, but really prioritizing partnerships with youth organizations, movements, and networks themselves. and partnership that really trigger new types of funding as well for youth inclusive and youth-led initiatives. And last but not least, the fifth pillar, which is about disengagement and reintegration, under which we're meant to promote and support actions that ensures that the needs, the concerns and aspirations of young former combatants, also in all their diversity, are taken into account in reintegration processes, and also to support the positive role that young women and men can play in reintegration and disengagement processes. I will now briefly zoom in one section, which is the one on participation. So we'll go to the next slide, Hilda. Thank you. I think we still see some of the written things on the screen, just to flag that. The one on participation, so under that section, we identify the need to remove barriers to youth participation, the importance of reviewing the impact that peace and security policies and practices may have on young people. We also support youth political participation throughout the electoral cycle, seek the support to youth participation in core government functions, in national and local level public service. It's also about ensuring that we ensure meaningful participation in constitution making, in transitional justice, in the promotion of and the support to the rule of law. And last but not least, it's about really promoting and championing youth-led spaces in the context of peace consultations and negotiations, or in the implementation of peace accords. So some examples of tools or projects, most of them with hyperlinks, include, for instance, the UNDP, UNFPA cross-border project in Mali and Burkina Faso on youth and peace, which is supported by the PBF. You also have a reference to a recent policy report on youth perceptions to inform the African Union's Silencing the Guns in Africa initiative, which was based on 6 intergenerational dialogues. You have examples of cross-party dialogues that were organized by the UN Verification Mission in Colombia. You have the Dialogue for the Future project in Bosnia and Herzegovina, etc. And in addition to programmatic example, you also have key tools that really can guide what we actually mean by meaningful participation in specific contexts. And for instance, you have the UN guidelines on participation, which provides clear and practical guidance on for states on how to ensure participation at national and international levels, as well as the European Commission and UNDP Handbook for electoral management bodies, for instance, on youth participation in electoral processes, which gives you a lot of information about temporary special measures, for instance, in the context of youth participation. I still have 1 minute, so I will go into the next slide simply to say that on partnerships, I won't repeat the entry points that you see there, but just to say that, for instance, examples include the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security under the first point, an example of coalition that is engaging a diversity of youth, peace and security actors. You also have the example of the Finland's National Action Plan on 2250, which similarly engaged a broad coalition. On the point 2 related to creating opportunities, an example was the Global Forum that we did in Amman in 2015. Before even the actual adoption of the first resolution on youth, peace and security. I would also quote some examples related to the support to the UNOI Peace Builder, the United Network of Young Peace Builders, who is also a member of the coalition. Examples related to the work that country teams are doing to support youth workers in Ukraine. For instance, the InfoSegura project supported by USAID on data collection, analysis, and dissemination. I will pause there and simply say that I, again, truly encourage you to read the guide, to use it as you develop proposal, as you review proposal as well, when you develop a new idea for an initiative or a project. And also for sure, feel free to also channel feedback to us as we also want to keep enriching that particular chapter. So thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to really hearing about how useful this is in your context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noelia. Thank you, Tammy. Apologies for the strange writing on the slides, but we were able to follow the presentation, and thank you for giving us a substantive overview of what the handbook is, what it includes, how it can be used, and the multiplicity of entry points that it offers for YPS programming. So I would like now to invite my panelists to please turn on their camera. Carla, Isa, Pauline, Brian, and Emmanuel, if you would like to please turn on your camera. And we're now entering the second part of our program, which is our panel discussion on realities of the youth, peace, and security field. We're going to start with a round of introduction. If you can, each of you give your name, who you work with or for, and in which country. So let's start with you, Carla.
Thank you, Cecilia. Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Morales. I work at Paz Joven Guatemala as a project coordinator, and since 2020, I lead Generation with Memory, an initiative that aims to increase and strengthen the training, organization, and youth participation in processes for peace building and violence prevention. It is developed within the project Promoting Integral Transitional Justice in Guatemala, implemented by the UNDP and the support of the United Nations Peace.
Muchísimas gracias, Carla. We're now going to turn to Pauline.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
We can hear you now.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Pauline de Neubourg. I work with UNDP as a youth empowerment specialist in Africa, so with the Regional Service Center in Africa. And lately, I've been located and deployed in Bamako, Mali, where I am supporting the UNDP country office on youth programming in the context of crisis, post-coup, and in the context of transition, which I will briefly talk about later. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Welcome. Brian?
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. It's wonderful to have Zoom because we can connect from all over the world, but it's a shame we're not all together because I see a lot of old friends, and it would be nice to be in the same place with you. My name is Brian Williams. 2016 to 2020, last summer, I was the resident coordinator in Albania. Prior to that, I was with the Peace Building Fund with Tammy and Cecile and PBF colleagues in New York. Since last summer and until now, I'm currently in the Development Coordination Office in DCO, working in their policy branch. And thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yes, and the pleasure is shared, Brian. Isa.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Isa. I'm the resident coordinator for Madagascar. I just joined a few months ago at the end of the year. Prior to that, I was working with WFP. So I'm very happy to be joining you today to present the Madagascar experience regarding the youth, peace, and security. Thank you.
Thank you, Isa. We're looking forward to hearing all about Madagascar. And last but not least, Emmanuel.
Oui, salut tout le monde. Moi, c'est Emmanuel Singa. Je viens de la République centrafricaine. Nous travaillons pour l'appropriation de la résolution 2250 au niveau local. Nous sommes membres au niveau national de l'United Network of Young Peace Builders. Merci.
Thank you. So Emmanuel is from the Central African Republic with SOS Civisme and a member of the United Network of Young Peace Builders, and they're working on the localization of Resolution 2250. Great, so thank you all for joining, and we'll start with you, Carla. We'd like to hear more, of course, about the work of your organization, PASJOVEN, and what you expect from the United Nations in terms of support to youth peace and security programming.
Thank you, Cecile. Well, PASJOVEN is a national civil society organization. It was founded by a group of young people 15 years ago. It is led by young people actually, and our actions aim to promote and influence at the community, regional and national level in the recognition, guarantee, and full exercise of the rights of Guatemalan adolescents and youth. About 1,000 of adolescents and young people are being part of the organization, integrating the national network of volunteers around the country. I would like to answer to your question based on our experience in the field of youth, peace, and security project development, especially thinking about what we have learned through the development of Generation with Memory. First, continue supporting youth-led processes, especially those that promote knowledge and recognition of national and local history. In our experience, we have found that family and community history is denied to many young people as part of the aftermath of the armed confrontation in the country. Neither families nor schools became reference for more young people, for some young people, however, we have documented through an investigation their interest in finding that history. Then we expect them to support long-term youth leadership through the formation of youth networks so they can contribute to strengthening their leadership and advocacy skills at the community level and promote and develop the necessary alliances and processes to transform the local ideas of youth as potential criminals towards the recognition of youth as peace builders and actively get involved in transforming the conditions that youth is facing as part of national and local paths of confrontation and allow them also to be part of the decision-making processes. Finally, to encourage and support youth lead in organizations to develop participatory research processes in order to create a local youth advocacy agenda related with the youth peace and security agenda and based on the community needs. Generation with Memory started with this kind of research, looking for knowledge, attitude, and practices young people have around armed confrontation, historical memory, peace culture, transitional justice, and violence prevention. The results we have found have been the starting point for all our actions, not only for the actions developed with youth, but also with the local leaders and authorities. So I strongly believe that the partnership between the United Nations and youth organizations and networks represent an enormous opportunity for young people to exercise transformative leadership and that impact their communities and their immediate realities. Thank you, Cecile.
Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing your experience. I'm now going to turn the floor to Isa Sanogo, so resident coordinator in Madagascar. So Isa, Madagascar has benefited from the support of the Peace Building Fund for several years, and the UN country team that you're heading has designed and implemented several projects focused on youth peace and security. We're interested in hearing about the priorities for this work and opportunities and challenges that you've seen in the field of youth peace and security.
Thanks, Cecile. Again, just to repeat that it's a pleasure for me to be part of the panelists today to share the experience of Madagascar. In the context of the PBF, I will start by giving a very brief overview of the PBF portfolio, and then I'll move on to the opportunities related to the programming as far as the youth peace and security aspect is concerned. I will give a couple of best practices, if I may say so, and come to challenges and conclude. I hope I won't be too long. Just to start with the Pbf support in Madagascar. As you may know, the PBS fund, Madagascar has been eligible to the Pbf fund since 2015. And the partners have designed and implemented the $30 million portfolio. Out of that portfolio, 6 million is covering the youth, peace, and security initiatives. And the initiatives are covering 5 pillars of the Security Council Resolution 2250. Although not all of them, taken individually, not each of the initiative is covering all the dimensions. But let me give a couple of examples. For instance, the SIFACA and the OBS-MADA projects give the youth a voice and promote their participation and leadership, whereas the project portfolio in the south of Madagascar would rather promote disengagement by providing youth with opportunities in the red zones. What I call red zones are the security hotspots. And then you have the youth peace ambassadors and the folkloric art projects, which engage youth in in sustaining peace and conflict prevention. Now I'll turn to the programming opportunities related to the youth peace and security in Madagascar. I'll start by saying that looking at the overall legal and strategic environment, I would say in general, the environment is very favorable to youth, peace, and security. I'm going to name just a few. For instance, the draft National Development Plan has a dedicated YPS outcome. And currently the government is developing a national youth strategy with a pillar on consolidation of peace and security. There is also a law which is dated 2004 on the national youth policy, which was also officially promulgated in 2016. That law and the decree actually recognize young people as critical partners in peace building. You also have a national roadmap on demographic dividend with a pillar on YPS. In practice, you also have several platforms that are in place, such as the National Youth Council, the regional and communal youth councils, as well as the local consultation platforms. In our COVID response plan, there is also a youth dimension across the board. Now, the ongoing UNSDCF is very sensitive to youth peace and security in the sense that the YPS is mainstreamed across the 4 pillars with a programmatic angle, which is going to be anchored into the humanitarian development and peace nexus approach. And we do also have within the UNCT, we have a youth thematic group, which is in place to bring more coherence and synergies around the youth programming in general. Now, let me move on to some more specifics in terms of good practices in YPS programming as it pertains to the Pbf portfolio. I would start by saying that on the networks and the platforms established, we have almost close to 11,000 people, of which young people account for over 5,000 adolescent girls and boys, which to me is very promising in terms of representation in the platforms. The Pbf also supported 75 young people who were trained and became peace messengers in their communities. The trained peace messengers have reached out to over 7,000 young people with peace promotion messages, and they have developed 52 peace plans for their own communities. Now, the partnerships that were also built thanks to the support of the PBF led to the establishment of partnership with local scouts that are now being strengthened for the implementation of community-based approaches, as well as the organization of advocacy sessions with local leaders. Now, let me turn to some of the challenges we face despite the positive outcomes I mentioned. First, I would mention the social cultural norms and the traditional influences that could constitute barriers that tend to exclude the youth from dialogues, conflict resolution, as well as peace building activities. We also, I think we face some issues in terms of capacities of the youth organizations, the financial resources that are available, as well as the basic infrastructure for youth development and their own involvement in peace building activities. All of those aspects in terms of resources are quite insufficient. I noticed that during the presentation, the introductory presentations, there were mentions of some issues when preparing the YPS programs, such as, I would say, the risk to consider youth as a bulk without necessarily considering the diversity of their interests, their issues, as well as their capacities. Or I also noted another issue which was mentioned, the risk to consider that we know what the youth want without sufficiently involving them in the design of the project. What I would like to stress here is that those issues are often aggravated by the limited time generally allocated to the preparation of the projects and programs. As a consequence, there is often limited time to consult and engage youth in project conception. I would not even speak of the engagement when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, for instance, in community-based survey mechanism, where I do think there are more opportunities as well. And in addition to that, I think the program teams are, from a conceptual point of view, the program teams are not always comfortable with the potential complexities of drafting strong conflict analysis as well as theories of change. To conclude, I'm tempted to say that the Peace Building Fund has helped to provide a solid foundation with considerable results. However, consolidating the lessons learned to plan is fundamental in the journey of achieving more youth-responsive YPS programs. The fact that young people play a critical role in their communities, the fact that young people have skills, talents, and passion, if we empower them, they will contribute to social cohesion, resilience, and sustainable development of their communities in positive ways. To end, I would say that the YPS Handbook is an opportunity for the UNCT and its partners to capitalize on its content to overcome some of those challenges I mentioned previously, and to also strengthen the YPS programming in Madagascar. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Issa, for this really interesting presentation and for reminding us of some of the challenges when of engaging young people, the challenge of the timing of donor timelines, the challenge of involving a diversity of young people that we know is also, we can often reach out to the most easily accessible young people. So how do we create these mechanisms so we have the representation of the diversity of voices? And I was also very interested to hear about the UN Sustainable Development Framework having a focus on youth peace and security. That's also one of the hopes with the handbook that it can help bring a participatory mechanism and young people's voices in the CCA, the country common analysis, and in these frameworks for the UN and its collaboration with the government. So thank you so much for sharing this, this experience. I will now turn the floor to Pauline. So Pauline, you work in the Africa region, and as you were explaining, you currently support the Mali UNDP country office. Can you speak to some of the work you've been doing there and some of the lessons learned on youth, peace and security?
Thank you, Cécile. Yes. Okay, so hi again, everyone, and very happy to join this conversation today. So as you said, Cécile, and as I said before, indeed, I've been here in Mali supporting the country office, the UNDP country office, in the past few months in the context of transition. So I will try to share a few reflections and few thoughts from my experience, especially here in Mali, but also broadly speaking in the Sahel region, on how the youth, peace and security agenda actually translates very well to the context here. But quickly to start, just to confirm that for us, this handbook is really a fantastic resource for us UNDP practitioners in Africa and I guess all over the world. Also because UNDP, as you may know, has identified youth and women empowerment as one key strategic pillar across the continent in Africa. So we actually consider that youth are and must be agents of change if we want to continue with the peace and security agenda and to move forward with it. So it really is relevant for us. Now, talking more specifically about my assignment in Mali, it has been actually a very good evidence that youth must be part of the crisis response mechanisms. They must be part of the peace and security agenda and of the offered solutions. Why? Well, first, because when there is a crisis, whatever type of crisis, you will notice that youth is always there, right? So not only they are always there because as we said before, they are more likely affected by the effects of the crisis, but also because most often they are the first responders to the crisis. So if I take the example of Mali, in Mali, 67% of the population is less than 24 years old, so very young. And we actually consider it's a huge potential of social mobilization, right? So for example, when COVID-19 started to hit the country, to hit Mali last year, youth volunteers were the first ones to be quickly mobilized, quickly deployed to the most remote communities. In fact, in partnership with the UNV program, to which I want to give credit as well, to raise awareness against the virus. So that was a good example. Now, I will quickly go through a few challenges as well, not to repeat what my colleague from Madagascar just mentioned. And I will start with the challenges so I can move to the positive side of my intervention. So in terms of challenges, again, taking the example of Mali, although we know then that there is a large part of the population is young, we notice that very often young women and men, civil society, broadly speaking, remains underrepresented in all political spheres. In the case of Mali, in the transitional government, they are underrepresented, and they have been, over the past years, underrepresented as well in the implementation of and the monitoring mechanisms of the peace agreement. Secondly, of course, it was mentioned before, the COVID-19 pandemic in Mali has actually exacerbated the existing challenges faced by young people in the country and I guess across the continent. The consequences of the pandemic have had dramatic effects, not only on health, but of course also on access to education, access to employment, inclusion in public decisions. Also human rights violations have been found out. So in general, we also know that youth is also deeply affected by the socioeconomic crisis, and in Africa, in many countries of Africa, it's actually very difficult to assess because most of the young people do work in the informal sector. So it also it also enhanced a little bit the negative impact of the socioeconomic crisis. And maybe last challenge I would like to point out, in line with the Leave No One Behind approach, which has been mentioned already by my colleagues before, we think that we must leave no youth behind, of course. But what does it mean? It means that we need to ensure that all youth actually do have access to the infrastructures, being formal or informal infrastructures, including in this post-COVID world, to digital tools that are more and more encouraged to be used. So we need to make sure that digitalization is actually addressed, because more than an opportunity, sometimes it can actually be a challenge in countries like Mali, where the internet penetration rate can be very low. But I want to move on to opportunities, just to stay positive. So in terms of opportunities, and again it's based mainly on my experience in Mali. Well, of course, the demographic potential, it's a fact, but young people being so many, it has to be an opportunity to advance the youth, peace and security agenda, to promote the participation of young people, the empowerment of young people in public spheres, make their voices heard on the political scene, and ensure that the decisions are taken in a meaningful way, taking into account their needs and aspirations in all their diversity. A second opportunity for Mali specifically, in fact, we think that the current crisis, because it has been qualified as a crisis, right? The current political transition is another opportunity for us and for meaningful engagement of young people in all their diversity, because it opens a new dialogue in the country. So we consider it can be an opportunity to formulate, implement durable solutions involving young people. Building on this momentum, seeing that the latest developments in Mali have actually showed that the role of youth is critical in responding to crisis. So from COVID to the current transition, UNDP has actually engaged with youth as key partners for peace and development, and has invested into key initiatives and programs. So that includes the launch and operationalization, the rollout of the Youth Connect program that many of you must know, the implementation of various youth-related projects funded by the Peace Building Fund that my colleague has mentioned before, and very recently the development of a new youth and peace project in the central and northern parts of Mali. Thirdly, again, another opportunity, youth are part of the solutions. We have seen that here in Mali. Currently, UNDP in Mali is actually supporting the Youth Entrepreneurship Pilot Project, which has started right after the coup in the context of the transition, in partnership with a foundation called Tony Elumelu Foundation. And through this partnership, through this pilot, we give young people with the tools, the skills, and also with grants to build and grow their business, assuming that it will then impact on the long-term socioeconomic transition of the country. Talking about a solution, in collaboration with the UNDP Accelerator Labs, that some of you also may know, we actually, in Mali including, we identify startups, associations, networks, who often are actually mainly composed of young people, and they have durable solutions to offer. So for us, it's also an opportunity. Just to give a very quick example, in Mali, about 100 young people were invited to share their innovative solutions, their talents, in the form of a hackathon in December, to identify durable solutions for governance and green solutions in the context of transition. At a larger scale, we think, UNDP thinks that youth empowerment, particularly youth participation in the political and socioeconomic spheres, is actually central to peace and stability. And in that sense, the first UNDP regional projects for youth empowerment in the Sahel has just been endorsed in December 2020. So very recently, and it's actually another opportunity because it will offer a space for young people to create opportunity, their own opportunities, and further engage with young people into the socioeconomic transformation of the region, and to a greater extent to peace and security in the region. I hope I'm not too long. I will move to the lessons learned now, and I will end here. So in terms of lessons learned, there are actually many, but I will just take away 3 of them. First one being, we need to connect young people, including across borders. So Noelia mentioned it before, in the Liptako-Gourma region, which covers Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, we have the cross-border project funded also by the Peace Building Fund. So it's actually an opportunity to connect young people across borders. We also have the Youth Connect platform, which has now been established in 20 countries across Africa, Mali being the last one to join. And it has proved being an excellent platform to connect young individuals, but also young networks, talents, associations to promote innovative and durable solutions. Second lesson learned, youth peace and security needs to go across the humanitarian peace and development nexus. Why? Because when giving the tools to the young people to be the first responders, when involving them in the humanitarian response, in the first response to a crisis, we also provide them the skills, the seat at the table, and safe infrastructures to connect. And then doing so, we also enable young people to be part of a long-term development plan. We increase their employability, we create jobs, we promote innovation, we impulse social cohesion, which in turn will impact positively on the long-term transformation and stability of the country or sometimes of a region. And in Mali, it has been particularly relevant in the context of transition and probably will continue to make sense towards the election. And last point that I wanted to make, which I think is quite obvious across the YPS handbook, is that we must involve youth in all steps of our youth peace and security programming, from early warning mechanisms to post-conflict response through conflict analysis. Not only youth must be consulted, but they also should drive the consultation processes. So for example, I will end on this. In Mali, two very quick examples. Through the Youth and Peace Project, UNDP supports the participation of young men and women into early warning mechanisms and local committees. And again, in this transition context, UNDP has worked with a foundation called Tuindi Foundation to undertake a survey to collect young people's needs and aspirations in this context. What do young people need and want from this transition? And we used, in fact, a civil society organization mainly composed of young people to drive this consultation process. And by doing so, I think we also build trust with young people. So to conclude, what I wanted to showcase here with my experience of Mali is that it's important not only to hear from young people, but also to co-create with them, to partner with young people. That's what UNDP encourages with all our partners. So I will stop here. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to share everything. And really, I encourage all of you to make a very good use of this fantastic handbook. I'm sure it will support all our global efforts in promoting the role of young people into peace and security agenda. Thank you, Cécile.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for this really interesting presentation, all the examples you provided. Thank you for reminding us that young people are often the first responders when there's a crisis, and there are questions also in the chat around the interlinkages between YPS and humanitarian and development, and you also mentioned the nexus later on in your presentation, so maybe we can go back to all these points during the discussion. And thank you also for reminding us that leaving no one behind in most countries mean leaving no young people and no adolescents behind, and that this age dimension is really important when we're looking at how to engage and work with marginalized population who very often are young people. So thank you. Brian, So before joining DCO, where you are right now, you were the resident coordinator in Albania. And in this capacity, you oversaw the design and implementation of a very important project in the Western Balkans on building capacities and momentum for the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, also known as RYCO. Can you please tell us about this work, their outcomes, and some of the lessons that you learned in this process?
Great, thanks, Cecile, and thanks to all the super interesting presentations from the panelists. If you'll allow me, before I get to your question, actually, I want to pick on something that that Isa said from Madagascar. And hello, Isa. I didn't send my greetings to you before. About the UN's planning frameworks at country level. So the Common Country Analysis and the Cooperation Framework. These really are important opportunities to get youth voice, youth perspectives, peace and security perspectives anchored within the planning processes. It's how you get attention. It's how you get government support. It's how eventually you get financial resources. And so it's a really important opportunity. Many UN country teams have youth advisory groups of one kind or another. And I think the handbook that we're launching today, particularly those chapters that, suggest or identify common points of entry, should be really useful to those engaging in common country analysis exercises and in cooperation framework design exercises, because there's very concrete ideas there, and you can use your youth advisory group to build some momentum for those ideas. So let me turn indeed to one of my favorite activities, the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, RYCO. Was really a wonderful experience to be a part of. It was a privilege. It is a cross-border program, so it's for the Western Balkans. I'm not even allowed to say 6 countries. It was for the Western Balkans 6. So, from the very get-go, this activity was one that was around peace building. And I think, it came to my attention first when I was invited to a launching event. And at that launching event was the Prime Minister of Albania and the ministers of youth for all of the Western Balkan 6 territories. So Serbia, but also Kosovo. And, I thought this is really kind of remarkable. Here I've been reading about the tensions and conflict across the Western Balkans, and you've got ministerial and prime ministerial political attention to an initiative that was about youth, that was explicitly about peace building. And this is something that we struggle so often to see in peace building activities. There's a lot of great ideas out there, but often the political will from the government side is not there. And it's not that governments need to be at the center of everything. Of course not. We're in a world where there's private sector and citizen initiatives and movements of all kinds. But governments that create space to talk about peace building issues is really critical and can be so helpful. Creates an enabling environment. And there you had, the representatives of 6 authorities that were somehow supposed to be in conflict, saying, we want a youth initiative that works on these questions. So, I mean, for me, that was really sort of the most important signal that there was some opportunity here. The RYCO activity incorporated a lot of the things that I've heard the other panelists talk about. So co-design and getting youth at the center from the very beginning. It was essentially, the RYCO program was one of calls for proposals for small grants. So in that sense, it's kind of a classic approach. But I think it is a valuable approach because it does allow the space for young people to put forward their own ideas. Because it was a cross-border project, the way they did it is that proposals that came in needed to cross the border. So any proposal needed to have somehow a young person from one country and from another territory across the border, across the divides that the project was trying to address to make a proposal. I mean, that was a great incentive. I think it got the incentive lines correct for what the project was trying to achieve. But it also, there's some challenges in there. So mixing in the lessons learned and challenges in my couple of minutes here. It's not an automatic thing to presume that young people across the borders, across the divides that you're trying to bridge, know how to make that initial contact, even to make the proposal for the activity that they want to pursue, right? You have a kind of chicken and egg problem here. And I think that what Raiko was learning along the way is there's so much work to be done in capacity building from the beginning. And you want to make sure that you're doing that capacity building itself in ways that are youth-led, even so that it's an iterative process of engagement and capacity building. The risk that I think we saw to some degree happen, risks don't happen, but you get my point, in the early rounds of the proposals were that you had sort of the most well-established, based in the capital city, more likely somehow anchored in the elite youth that had connections and opportunities already, that were able to benefit from the program, which still did a lot of wonderful stuff, but in a context of leaving no one behind, you weren't necessarily getting at the most challenged populations or those who maybe you really wanted to bring into the program. One interesting thing that the program did that I hadn't seen elsewhere is a really explicit outreach to schools. So they wanted schools to apply. And in a way, this got around the first problem I mentioned, because schools were everywhere, and schools are a little bit more, I mean, they're very well-established organizations, right? So in principle, you could say, hey, take a school from a rural city in Kosovo and match it up with a school in a rural city in Serbia, and they could immediately reach out to each other. And in some ways, I think that worked well. On the other hand, it meant you need to do peace building work with school educators and with school administrators so that they can provide the supportive environment for the young people in their schools. And it also meant, schools are not habituated in our modern world to sort of behave like an NGO and write proposals and, get funding and all the rest. And so you also needed to figure out even some administrative issues about, is a school able to apply for a grant? And there's some administrative structures with their own governments about how all that works. Yeah, I think those are kind of the main. I think those are kind of the main points that what we learned from this program and how we got started. I guess the last lesson I would make is that, often implementing peace building programs are peace building in and of themselves. And the structure that they set up to govern this initiative was both innovative and complicated. It had a government person from each of the Western Balkan 6 territories. That's pretty straightforward. It had a youth representative from each of the territories. The youth representative was nominated by government, but supposedly acted independently. So you had a board of 12, a governing board of 12. They agreed that the meetings would rotate amongst the 6 territories, also nice. One of the meetings took place in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, and the government there was very proud, and so they decided to hold the meeting in the National Parliament building, which is fine. They had a good governing board meeting. It was Kosovo's turn next. Kosovo thought, we'll do like they did in Sarajevo, and we'll hold it in the National Parliament building, the meeting. And that proved to be, a huge problem, because Serbia said, no, there is no National Parliament building for Kosovo. That's a problem. They're politicizing the project, this led to a delay of several months while the diplomacy of all this worked out. Along the way, there were issues with the youth representative from one of the countries concerned, because they received instructions from the government, but they were supposed to be independent. So it was a big hiccup. But I think it was also, I remember writing a note to PBF at the time. I wrote to Tammy, to you, and to Marc-André, and I said, things are slowing down. We're not going to meet the targets. The program's delayed. And, I got a one-liner back from PBF that said, that's peace building. So I think it's true. But I think it is also important when you're designing activities to recognize that even the process of writing a good peace building program is itself peace building, and you should sort of factor that into your work. It takes more time, it takes more effort. You're going to encounter challenges along the way, but that's part of the process. Anyway, really great to be here, and thanks for giving me this occasion to think back on some of the work over the last few years.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for telling us about the projects and its different opportunities, entry points. Thank you for speaking about schools. I mean, we're talking here about engaging young people. So where do you find young people? You find them in schools. Pauline, you mentioned employment. Where do you find young people? How do you engage young people? Of course, it's also around skills building, vocational building. Thank you. So many questions we'd like to discuss. Of course, time is against us. I'm moving now to Emmanuel. So Emmanuel from CAR, we have a PowerPoint invite. If you can please put it up. Emmanuel is going to speak in French. So I'm going to try to do live translation for you, ladies and gentlemen. Please bear with me. And we have just a few minutes until we can take a couple of questions. Emmanuel, please, you have the floor. Emmanuel.
Comme a dit Cécile, je vais... Allô, allô?
On vous entend, Emmanuel. You can go ahead.
OK. Donc, ma présentation va se focaliser essentiellement sur les bonnes pratiques des jeunes constructeurs de la paix au niveau local. Déjà, notre organisation travaille sur la question de la paix et la sécurité au niveau de la République centrafricaine.
Emmanuel, I'm going to jump in because otherwise it's going to be a little difficult. So Emmanuel's presentation is going to focus on local peace building work in the Central African Republic. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Donc, c'est ça, slide, si vous pouvez avancer.
Okay, next slide, please.
Donc, nous avons 5 objectifs majeurs au niveau de la République centrafricaine où nous essayons d'engager les jeunes, notamment la consolidation de la paix à travers la promotion de l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité et l'agenda Jeunesse, Paix et Sécurité via l'appropriation communautaire par les organisations de la jeunesse et pour les jeunes.
So there are 5 main objectives of Emmanuel's organization to engage young people. The first one is peace building and promoting women peace and security and youth peace and security through local appropriation of the resolutions and of these frameworks. Emmanuel?
Également des travaux de recherche pour comprendre les dynamismes communautaires des jeunes constructeurs de la paix au niveau local. Et ces recherches sont également publiées via le réseau United Network of Young Peace Builders.
Research to understand local dynamics of peace building, and these research reports are being published through the United Network of Young Peace Builders, among others.
Slide. Oui, quelques points sur nos activités au niveau local. Nous engageons également, lié à la pandémie, nous engageons également les jeunes à s'engager beaucoup plus en ligne concernant les campagnes de plaidoyer en ligne pour la résolution 2250. Et également...
So a few examples of activities. With the COVID pandemic, there has been an increase of online engagement and activities related to youth peace and security.
Oui, également, comme nous l'avons souligné tout au début de notre présentation, donc lors de la 5e anniversaire de la résolution 2250, nous avons eu à publier une recherche intitulée Youth Leadership on 22 and 15, supportée par Corded Pays-Bas. Et nous avons fait des articles sur l'implication et la participation des femmes et des jeunes dans la lutte contre les armes légères de petit calibre, qui est publié par International Action Network on Small Arms.
So on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of Resolution 2250 at the end of last year, there was a publication of some research on youth leadership on 2250, which was supported by CordAid, and also a series of articles, including on participation of young people and women in the fight, it's not the right word, but I can't find it, around the fight against light weapons. And this was supported by the International Action Network on Small Arms, which is based in New York City.
Comme vous savez, les jeunes constructeurs de la paix travaillent dans des contextes compliqués, difficiles et des pays conflictuels comme la République centrafricaine lors des périodes électorales récentes qui a conduit à beaucoup de violence au niveau du pays. Nous avons décidé d'initier une campagne en ligne dénommée Peace in Central African Republic pour engager les jeunes à valoriser leur dynamisme communautaire sur la question de la paix et de la sécurité au niveau local.
So as you know, young peace builders very often work in local contexts that are difficult and fraught with tensions. That's the case of the Central African Republic with recent tensions around the elections. And so SOS Civism launched this online campaign Peace to engage young people on peace and security issues.
Slide. Oui, donc nous avons quelques liens de nos articles ou de nos recherches qu'on a pu publier. Mais lors des consultations, nous avons remarqué qu'il y a vraiment cette question de joindre, par exemple, l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, parce que nous savons qu'ils ont beaucoup de résolutions et peut-être les manuels sur la jeunesse, paix et sécurité également, que nous sommes en train de lancer et les programmes axés.
Oh, Emmanuel, Emmanuel, on te perd un petit peu. You're breaking up a bit, Emmanuel, but in the meantime, I'll just point out, so on this slide, you see a few hyperlinks to a website where you can find some of the research and information about some of the work that's been presented by Emmanuel, including on the relationship with women, peace and security and youth peace and security. And let me check, but I'm afraid we have lost Emmanuel. Emmanuel, tu m'entends? So unfortunately, it looks like we've lost Emmanuel. Hopefully we can get him back. Thank you, everyone.
Oui.
Ah, Emmanuel, tu es de retour.
Slide. Slide. Oh. Oui, nous travaillons également sur la question de l'appropriation communautaire du manuel Jeunesse, Paix et Sécurité. Donc, via ce lancement, il faudrait bien que le manuel sur la jeunesse, paix et sécurité soit connu par les jeunes constructeurs de la paix et soit diffusé au niveau local, en lien avec les programmes des Nations Unies sur la question de la paix au niveau national.
So a call by Emmanuel for the handbook to be localized, appropriated by local peace builders, which would of course require its translation and its accessibility for young people.
Oui, également, il est important de prendre en compte l'intégration des jeunes dans tous les programmes des Nations Unies sur la question de la paix. Nous avons remarqué chez nous, il y a un programme sur la question, un programme conjoint jeune qui implique les organisations de la jeunesse et nous disposons les bonnes pratiques en République centrafricaine car nous avons un groupe de travail adolescents et jeunes qui travaillent sur cette question afin de relayer les activités menées par les jeunes constructeurs de la paix au niveau local.
So very important to involve young people in UN-led programs and at all stages of the program. And in Central African Republic, there is a working group focused on young people and adolescents that's working towards this aim.
Également, il est important de prendre en compte les besoins et les aspirations des jeunes constructeurs de la paix au niveau national. Notamment concernant le manuel Jeunesse, Paix et Sécurité. Il faudrait bien que les jeunes constructeurs de la paix puissent s'approprier de ce manuel et que la diffusion au niveau local soit bien connue également au niveau national. Vu qu'il y a les jeunes qui sont également marginalisés du fait de leur implication, par exemple, dans les questions de groupes armés ou qui sont dans les rangs des groupes armés et qui sortent, leur réintégration au niveau communautaire, des fois, pose problème. Et je pense que c'est une occasion pour nous de divulguer, de vulgariser cette manuel au niveau national pour que ça soit connu et au niveau international.
Yes, so it's important to disseminate this handbook at the local level, national level, including with marginalized youth who might not be have easily access to this book and the information it contains.
Slide. Pour nos activités, nous, SOS Civil Centrafrique, nous travaillons vraiment pour l'appropriation communautaire de la résolution 2250 et également la résolution 1325. Nous pensons qu'il est important de pousser les discussions à haut niveau pour pouvoir voir comment nous pouvons mutualiser nos efforts, surtout les pays en conflit comme la République centrafricaine, où au-delà de tout, les jeunes constructeurs de la paix essaient de bâtir la paix au niveau communautaire pour que notre voix soit amplifiée via la résolution 2250. Donc, il est important de prendre le leadership. Nous savons pertinemment que les jeunes constructeurs de la paix peuvent faire des recherches concernant l'agenda jeunesse, paix et sécurité et peut également prendre le leadership sur l'agenda jeunesse, paix et sécurité au niveau local pour que l'appropriation soit comprise au niveau communautaire. Je vous remercie.
SOS Civisme, Emmanuel's organization, is working on with young peace builders, trying to amplify their voices, give them access to contribute to peace and security. You have here his contact information. Please be in touch. Merci beaucoup, Emmanuel. I certainly did not do justice to everything you said, but I hope at least everyone got the idea of some of the work that you're doing. Thank you, everyone. Ilva, I'm going to ask you to please stop sharing your screen. Thank you. So we just have a few minutes, but that's the price to pay when you have all these great presentations, and I think everyone really brought great insights and concrete field examples in this and on the youth peace and security programming realities. Noelia and Tammy and Emmanuel, I'm going to invite all of you to come back on camera. So we just have a couple of minutes, but there are a few questions that were raised in the chat box that I'm going to repeat here. So there was a question about how involving young people when they're not organized in groups and associations. How do we do that? One question. Another one is about the question of young people and disabilities and the most marginalized young people, how to engage them. Does the handbook address that? Also a question of the intersection between youth peace and security, youth in humanitarian and in development settings. And also a question on the role of religion, and I would imagine faith-based organization in promoting peace building with and for youth. So the last question is around the role of religion and faith-based organization in promoting peace building with and for youth. So we just have a couple minutes. Any one of our panelists would like to jump in on one or several of these questions? Carla.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to share that it's a hard task to get young people involved when they are not participating in any other organization, or if networks are not created in the local spaces. That's part of what we face at Generación con Memoria, or Generation with Memory, because it started when the pandemic already started. So we need to look for the groups, or need to create them also. And just like to share my experience, we have made some alliances with municipal offices that serve young people, health services, for example. We have approached teachers. We have been identifying actors who have contact with young people, for example, librarians, and many other actors and actresses that we think can help us to get in touch with young people. Also, I commented at the chat that sports teams are really important, because those are the kind of activities that local governments used to promote more than other kind of spaces that maybe are, I don't know what to say, but maybe useful for young people. But those are the spaces that we need to approach, and those are the alliances that we need to be creating, and the people we need to be in touch. Thank you, Cecile.
Thank you so much, Carla. And yes, good point also on sports activities, again, about where to find young people is where young people congregate. Sports is definitely one of them. We have time for one other of our panelists to come in if anyone would like. Yes, Isa.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the questions that were posed are very pertinent, and it's quite challenging to address them. But what I'm seeing through my limited experience of the projects regarding the PBF is that I think in the design of the project, the selection criteria matters. And if I take, for instance, the example of the popular art project that I referred to, it's clear that when you have the participating entities, you have a chance to include not only the youth organizations, but you do have the traditional communities as well as the faith-based organizations. So from that perspective, I think it's very important when you are designing the project, the participants themselves in terms of institutions matter a lot to be able to then build around it to identify the youth. Now, again, in the selection criteria, you have different aspects to consider when you go by the assumption that you do not want to leave anyone behind. And from that perspective, for instance, disability aspect, gender aspect, all those aspects in the programming principles are part of the selection criteria that you consider. As a matter of fact, what we here in Madagascar, and it's nothing new, we are trying to do now is to systematize those aspects into the spectrum of our project selection criteria, so that some of those programming principles are embedded in the work we do, and we are proceeding with the UNCT to make sure that those aspects are validated so that all the agencies agree that this is the way to go. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Isa. Thank you also, Pauline, for your answer in the chat. I really wish, oh, Brian.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw it in the slide about the entry points. I think we need to grapple collectively on the question of youth political participation. So we see youth engagement in political movements all over the world. We often see them on the front lines of social movements. In Myanmar is a whole new generation that is out there struggling at the moment. But it's a very tricky thing because often youth gets very instrumentalized, or it's hard for the UN to engage because it's political parties, and that brings with it a whole separate set of challenges. But I think we can't avoid the issue because it has great potential, both positive and negative, on the way countries go. So we need to keep struggling with and trying to find ways to engage with this question.
Thank you, Brian. You're making closing this webinar even more difficult because I wish we had time to discuss this. And of course, what's happening in Myanmar is very preoccupying, and wish we had more time to discuss these issues. And I know Noelia would certainly burning to also jump in. But unfortunately, we need to close. Everyone certainly needs to go attend other meetings and discussions. I want to thank really from the bottom of my heart all of our panelists for their really insightful, substantive, really interesting contributions. Thank you so much for making the time. Thank you, colleagues, for joining and for all your active contribution online and through the chat. We will send a recording of this webinar, and we'll be very happy to share the slides, of course. And I would like to give the last word to our colleague Erike Tongos from the Folke Bernadotte Academy.
Thank you, Cecile, for the introduction and for moderating the event in such a masterful way. So my name is Erika Tangøy. I'm a specialist on youth peace and security on the Folke Bernadotte Academy, which is a Swedish government agency. And it's been a great pleasure listening to the excellent presentations and the very insightful discussions so far. And I'm also very happy to hear that the handbook has been so warmly received. And on behalf of Folke Bernadotte Academy, I would like to express my appreciation for the strong partnership we've had with the Peace Building Support Office, UNFPA and UNDP that truly paved the way for this handbook. It is clear that the Youth Peace and Security agenda is happening. Young peace builders like Emmanuel and Carla and their organizations are already at the forefront of preventing conflict and building lasting peace in their communities. And as global stakeholders, we, the state actors, UN and international organizations alike, we must give recognition to and learn from these efforts and experiences. We need to learn in order to become better at designing more youth inclusive and responsive programs, at the same time as we need to start supporting already existing youth-led initiatives in a way that creates sustainability without compromising youth ownership. And I think the Youth Peace and Security Programming Handbook constitutes an important tool for this. However, a handbook is nothing but a piece of paper unless people translate the words into action. I'm therefore looking forward to seeing the impact of the handbook as the UN and others picks it up and puts it into practice. Developing youth peace and security specific programs alone will, however, not be enough to achieve the goals of the agenda. We must move beyond implementing ad hoc and siloed youth initiatives and start mainstreaming a youth perspective in all aspects of our organization's mandates, structures, and operations. So as a next step, we simply can't only operationalize it, the youth peace and security agenda. We also need to institutionalize it. And this means that the principles of the agenda must become an integral part of everyday decisions, practices, behaviors across our organizations. And the senior managements have an important role to play in this regard, as the youth peace and security agenda still needs to be strengthened with appropriate levels of resources, technical capacity, and commitment. As a partner to the UN and part of Team Sweden, the Folke Bernadotte Academy is encouraging the UN at all levels to continue and to scale up their engagement and to create strong institutional preconditions for the full realization of the youth peace and security agenda. And FBA will remain committed, and we will continue to support the UN in this effort. I'm therefore very happy to announce that the FBA, together with the UN System Staff College, are working together to develop a global training on youth peace and security. And with that said, I would like my colleague Ylva to share the PowerPoint slide. The training aims at strengthening the capacity of practitioners to effectively implement the YPS agenda. And we primarily, but not exclusively, target UN staff members. The training program draws upon the Programming Handbook and consists of 3 fundamental learning modules, as well as 3 advanced learning tracks focusing on applied skills. The full training program will be available on the UN System Staff College online platform starting this fall. However, already in May, a pilot version will be offered to a limited number of young peace builders and UN representatives with the purpose of testing the methodology and gathering feedback. Please stop sharing the slide. Time is running up, so I would like to end by saying that we, the UN, state actors, international organizations, must do more. And we need to do better in supporting youth participation and leadership. This includes looking at our own organizations and assess and rethink priorities, practices, behaviors, and attitudes. Because walking the talk is the only way for us to become relevant, meaningful, and sustainable partners to youth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erika. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day. And we'll continue the discussion soon, hopefully. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Merci beaucoup, Cécile.
Merci beaucoup, Cécile. C'était super. Bravo.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Cécile.
Brian. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Merci. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Merci.
Bye, Cécile. Merci.
Merci, Issa.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Gracias.
Miranda. Hi, everyone. So nice. It was such a gathering of friends.
Yes. Well done, Cécile.
Thank you, thank you. À bientôt, Miranda.
À bientôt. Au revoir.
À bientôt.
Bye,
Au revoir.
everyone. Bye.